All right. Hi, Deb. Okay. So
You're live.
hi, we're live. All right. Hi, and welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm Sara. Nicole, my co-host, is off in the UK this week. She is on a tour of all the bookshops in Edinburgh, London, and Dublin, and also visiting some family. So I'm joined today by Deb Harrison, who recently published her first collection of poetry. And Deb, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you, Sara. Thank you for having me. And I'm a little bit envious of your mom touring
I
bookshops
know.
all over the place. I'm like, well, that sounds amazing. So I am an author, which I have been a writer my entire life, and I'm super excited to have published my first collection of poetry, as you were very lovely to note. And I also do business and personal coaching and consulting. Everything connects together. So when people hear like you do poetry and you do business consulting, and I'm like, believe it or not, they're very much connected because at the core of everything I do is helping people recognize their gifts and use their gifts and help other people to use their gifts. And that's the backbone of my poetry and at the backbone
Right.
of my consulting work. So it's awesome to be able to see it all come to life.
Awesome. Well, so the title of your book or your poetry collection is On This Path. And I really loved the back, the back cover and the description there. So I'm just going to read that real quick. The poetry of On This Path offers a playlist of experiences, observations, and emotions that call for our connection. It shares of diving fully into love, joy, sadness, frustration, fear, and discovery. It leans into learning, moving through uncertainty. And I really liked that, especially the keyword of like playlist of experiences, because as I have poured through this collection, it is extremely relatable. I really loved that I feel like there's a note of resilience throughout the entire collection, which speaks to me. There's a lot of compassion and shared experiences. And I find, again, everything to be super relatable. And for someone like me who has mental health issues, I loved how uplifting the poetry is in here. Yes, some of it really, it touches your heart and it makes me a little teary. But in general, it really helps me to, it gives me reassurance and it really makes me feel like it is filling my cup, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
I wanted.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say I wanted to ask, what inspired you though to finally put a collection together?
Well, one of the things that inspired me was you. So, I think that and I'm emotional. I realized as you're asking me these questions, I've talked about my poetry a lot. I've
Mhm.
talked with people about it all the time. I've been writing forever, but this is really the first public interview conversation that I've had about the book since it's come to life.
Mhm.
Um, and so I didn't even realize that I was emotional until you were talking, and I'm like, wow, this is really exciting. And I think, and it has to do with that question that you just asked. So I think that we all have amazing stories. It's going to be the long answer because I think it gives the best
Yeah.
context for it. I think we all have incredible stories, right? There's poetry to how we live our lives and how we interact with people. It's a dance, right? And music at
Mhm.
its backbone has to do with lyrics that evoke emotion, but it also has to do with rhythm, right? So it's that rhythm of life. And so I've always kind of had that going and always been a writer, but things happen and they distract you from the things that you're passionate about because in addition to following the things that we're passionate about, we do have certain responsibilities to other people and to ourselves as we go about our lives, right?
Yeah.
And a couple years ago, I was working with a client and there were some different things that were happening and I knew that there were going to be some changes in what my business professional life was going to look like in terms of client stuff
Mhm.
and realized that this author voice inside of me, this writer voice inside of me at the same time as I was making these strategic business decisions was like right up there with that voice kind of being like,
Yeah.
and us, and hello, and we're still here, and what are you gonna do about this? And so I kind of thought like, okay, well, I'll just kind of work on it on the side. Like I'll be doing it. I'll pay more attention to that. But the more that I didn't give it focus, the more that it got louder and louder, like you really need to make this happen.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it was listening to that and it was recognizing my word for this year is the power of and.
Mhm.
recognizing that it doesn't have to be I'm doing this or this, but I can do all these different things. That the poet can be a life and I can still be a strategic business planner. Those things aren't opposite each other. It's all part of one big thing. And then meeting people like you who have called that out and recognized that and saw that in ways that made me feel very validated and very seen, not just as a person of knowledge and intellect, but as a person of feeling and emotion, and letting my love and
Mhm.
kindness be something that's really important and valuable,
Yeah.
has allowed me to just kind of really pour into that. So yeah, that's a lot, but I think it's
No, it's
all of the
good.
different pieces of my life coming together. And I think so you were one of those people, and just listening, really listening to myself.
I forgot to hold up the book just for a second. I want people to be able to see, like, and not have it be blurry. There we go. So, on this path. And then I wanted to have you read one that is your favorite and then give us some more details, just to give people a taste. And then I have a few, more questions for you. But do you have a particular one that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so it's hard to pick a favorite poet, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm sure any author would say, but I did think about different ones that moved me in different ways, and I think
Hmm.
I'm gonna land on one that I like for a variety of different reasons, which I'll talk a little bit like. So I will say I will preface this as favorite, one of my favorites. There are a lot of different things I like about this, which you can ask me about after I read it, but it's called "Let Me Be a Truth Light."
Yeah.
And, this is one that I hear sometimes in my head when I'm going through different experiences, so I'm gonna read that one. "Let me be a truth light into lives. My words and actions contradicting lies of a culture that's become devised of negativity and living in disguise. For these days are numbered, but the future, ours, remains for the taking, embracing, helping us to sustain those suffering, searching underneath the pain of confusion, bewildered, needing hope to regain faith that can change. May my life scars be the stars, leading travelers through the night, a purpose far more worth it than the fight for more to own and to be known for power and ranked success alone. Alone, yes, alone, feel so many souls that have been twisted and turned with the blindfold sewn on, then let go to walk on, to hold on to wanting and wanting. You have words of justice that can be thrust into trustless places and raise up the broken pieces and repair them with precious graces and faith in each trace of a moment. Say them. The prayers that we share, the most powerful warfare against despair. Raise them up. Breathe in peace that the dissonance in the distance is ours to dissipate with great reward. Let me be a truth light into lives. So,
The
yeah,
imagery of that one is very powerful as well.
yeah.
So,
So a couple things I really like about this. So
yeah.
it's I have different phraseology from different poems that I really like, and I
Hmm.
love the you have words of justice that can be thrust into trustless places and raise up the
Yeah.
broken pieces and repair them with precious graces and faith in each trace of a moment. Say them. I love the musicality of that. A
Yeah,
lot of
it's lyrical.
times, yeah, when I'm writing a poem, a lot of times it will start with something like that, a line, a phrase, which isn't necessarily always the first line or the end line. It could be anywhere in the poem. So sometimes it'll start with like almost in the middle and then I'll build around it.
Mhm.
And what I liked about that was there were some different things going on personally in my life at the time, and there were some things going on in the world at that point. And I was thinking that a lot of times we like almost bemoan the experiences that we're having and the experience of what's happening in the world, not in a like I'm resigned to the fact that things are going to be bad and there's nothing that I can do about it. But sometimes we do start to sink into that, right? Like that quagmire
Yeah,
of despair. And
absolutely.
so that particular phraseology was like me talking to others, but it was also talking to me. Like I'm saying I want to do these things. I want to be a positive light. I want to create change. I want to do good things, but like then do it. Right?
Yeah.
So it was like a little bit
Do
of
it, take
myself like,
action.
yeah, like you have words, so say them.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot like, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never harm me. And then, on the opposite side of that is the like words are really powerful. And I think that there's both. There are times when we have to just deflect words and recognize that our worth is more valuable than somebody's other else's definition. But there's also times we have to recognize that words are really powerful, right? It's the whole big piece of the puzzle. And so recognizing that you have those words that can go into those dark places and evoke change and bring about hope, I just found to be very inspiring, both as a projection that we can share with other people, but as something that we can bring on ourselves.
Yeah.
And that there's no framework in that poem that suggests the specific ways that we need to do that. I'm not kind of trying to promote a specific belief system, just saying like we can bring truth to light. And that, like, at the end of the day, regardless of your background, let's like
I
see
think
truth.
for each person,
Right.
they already know what that is for them, how they can, speak that truth, or how they live, or what actions they take. My favorite line is, "May my life scars be the stars leading travelers through the night, a purpose far more worth it than the fight for more to own and to be known, for power and ranked success alone." I love that. It's so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Beautiful. Okay, so that's a little taste of one of Deb's poems. And I wanted to say, for some people, poetry is not in their lives. Like, they don't do poetry, they don't pick up books, they don't read poetry in any way, shape, or form. It's probably maybe a big aversion to some people from previous college trauma. So what would you say to someone who doesn't read poetry? Like, what would you say to encourage them to pick up a collection?
Yeah, love that question. And so, well, so first, a little bit from my past, I was an English teacher. So I was an 11th grade English teacher. And
I did
so,
not know that. Okay.
yeah, and so there's an influence there. Obviously, part of that was because of my interest in stuff. And it also influences how I kind of talk about poetry with people, because certainly, particularly for 11th grade students, I think there's sometimes often a negative association with poetry because it's frequently things like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is not
Mm,
exactly the easiest for everybody to comprehend. You can't
no.
necessarily relate to it. I think also a lot of high school poetry is it's either very dark in nature or very light in nature. So it's at these two
Mhm.
extremes. And when you're and going through adolescence, there's a lot of motions you're processing that are in the middle place. So again,
Yes.
like we have, like you said, I think a negative connotation because we can't relate to it. And so
Mhm.
one of the things I would always do with my students is I would have them bring in song lyrics and analyze song lyrics. And they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're letting me bring in song lyrics." I'm like, "Guess what song lyrics are?
Yeah, that's a
Poetry."
great idea. Yeah.
Right? So I think it's, not every poet is for every person, even if you love
Mhm.
poetry, right? So even people who love poetry, there's gonna be certain poets you're like, they're for whatever reason, their phraseology, the length of the poems, the topics isn't for you. So I think, like, it's understanding that if you like music, you really do already like poetry because that's what lyrics are. So find the people that you can relate to. And even if you take, I don't know, a lot of people buy MP or getting stuff digitally now, so they're probably not getting CD booklets, although I see a lot of that coming back. My daughter just got a record, cassette tape, and CD from a music artist she likes, so it's coming back. And you open up those
Wow.
booklets, right? That's what we did. You
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
excited, you got it, you opened up the booklet because you could follow along with those lyrics. So, if you've
Yeah.
got access to a CD booklet or a cassette booklet, or some of the records have it, like, start consuming poetry that way. You already know that you relate to those words because you've been
Yeah.
liking that music. Read them that way. That kind of is like a good introduction to it.
Yeah.
And poetry is the reason that poetry is memorable is because of the rhyme and the cadence, but not all poetry is rhyming. So if you're not inclined to like poetry that's got the rhyming stuff, there's certainly that stuff in there. And
For
I
sure.
think when I picked the poems for this book, I tried to find as many different varieties of stuff that I had written. Like, so I tried to get from across my life, and I tried to get stuff that was like some that rhymed, some that was more anecdotal to kind of create that. That it would be an inspiration for people to go out and be like, oh, I may like, I liked that poem. Let me find a poet
Yeah.
who writes more of that type of stuff.
I wanna ask you later, so I'm gonna preempt this so that you're not on the spot, but if you
Sure.
have favorite poets or favorite, um, would it be lyricists? Is that what you
Yeah,
would
I think you
someone
could. Yeah, songwriters.
songwriters? Yeah,
Yeah,
lyricists. Okay.
absolutely.
Um, so I'll put a pin in that. But I wanted to read one that really spoke to me. This is the first one of the collection that really I loved. So this is is it okay if I read it?
Absolutely, I love
Okay.
listening to you read it. I actually made
Okay.
a mistake reading mine because I was like, "Oh gosh," I all of a
No,
sudden
it's
was like,
perfect.
yeah, go for it.
What if I told you? What if I told you that all of the things you think are wrong with you and all the mistakes you see in you could fit inside the tip of a freshly sharpened pencil that would write them down distinctly on the smallest square of paper that would be torn into pieces and planted, and in the deep, rich soil would grow into all of the magnificence that is you? I loved that one. So again, for me, a very uplifting because we can all be overly self-critical. And I loved that for me, just the imagery of all of the things that are wrong with me can be written down and put into like the tiny little tip of a freshly sharpened pencil,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
very, very teeny tiny and very insignificant, right? Um, anyway, so it makes
Yeah.
me feel more uplifted as well. And that's what I like about this collection, because not only does it speak to just how one sees themselves or how one sees what they're capable of, but there are poems in here that you have a Valentine's Day one that's in here that you're going to be your own Valentine, which I loved.
Yeah.
Um, there's ones about heartbreak, but another one that was really a favorite of mine, if I can find it, there's one that you wrote about the questions that your children ask you when you're putting them to bed. And as a
Yeah.
mother, I really connected deeply with that one. Oh, good. I can't find it, even though I thought that I
Yeah,
had
questions to
bookmarked it.
answer. So it is, let's see here. It's questions to hold, 67.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Questions to Hold is really beautiful. And I wondered if you could read that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, if I can, because it's the one that you just read, the freshly sharpened pencil.
Yeah.
So that's one of my more recent
Oh,
poems.
okay.
And what's really cool is that maybe, I don't know, because I don't time myself, that was one of the fastest written poems ever. It literally came to me as an entire
Like a
train of,
download.
yeah, like it came to me, and it was really cool because like sometimes sounds, I know you know my heart, so you'll know, and hopefully
Yeah.
anybody who's listening will understand where I'm coming from with this. But sometimes I write something, it comes to me, I write it, and I'm moved by it, almost as though it's coming from someplace else. So it's like,
Yeah.
which I think if you talk to people who create, whether it's painting or
Yes.
writing or like that's the
Yes.
experience, is it's like I'm like, that's a cool image, and I'm not really sure what inspired it, but I
Mhm.
do think it comes from people's, when people share stories with me, a lot of times like I really am processing the emotions that they're thinking about. Um, so I love that you love that one. That is one of my, that was almost the one that I was going to read. I love that one as well.
Um, I wanted to interrupt you just for a second because I know
Yeah,
I asked you to read that one, but is it Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert? Are you familiar with that book?
I've heard of it.
So I believe I'm looking it up now. Hang on. So it is a book that basically talks about the creative journey and the creative experience for wanting to be a painter or to create just about anything, whether you're a writer. And so Elizabeth wrote this book, and what she does is she talks a lot about how we just have to be open to those downloads or those streams of consciousness that come to you, which I can relate to, because I went to art school, and there's a lot to be said for creativity, meaning it's something that you do have to kind of turn on and off, or mostly keep it on, and it can get really difficult and very, very tiring. But the way through that, like burnout, especially with writer's block, is to again, just be listening, having those quiet moments where you do get those like channeling experiences. And I know that sounds pretty woo for a lot of people, but I think it's similar to what you were saying.
Right. Well, and I think
So
the other piece is I think sometimes people define like creativity in this like kind of very specific way. So that they'll say like I'm not a creative person, or that's a creative person. And I think like creativity has a huge
oh
net,
yeah.
right? Like there's a variety of different ways that you can be creative. And so like creativity, so maybe you write a poem that isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea, or maybe you paint a picture that not everybody's going to like. But
Hmm.
like, you don't need to define creativity as like, I can create Da Vinci-like artwork, right? Or I
Right.
can write like William Shakespeare. Like, if
Right.
you wanna write and you enjoy writing, then that can be a creative process for you rather than kind of putting yourself into this box. So, I love that, right? The quiet, like, just listening and feeling and letting your senses be open to what's going on around you.
That stillness.
So
Okay.
yeah, so 67. So and a little which the next, because I'm actually working on it, and I didn't include the reflections in this book because I wanted people to just read the poetry and do whatever they
Yes.
wanted with it, right? Interpret it. But I've started kind of working on these like anecdotal things. And I remember writing this out, my kids were young-ish, so I don't remember the exact age, but obviously old enough that they could be asking questions, but still in that age where it's like some of the questions, sometimes they're so innocent, they have no idea how
Yeah.
profound the question is, right? Like,
Hmm.
"Oh, why are those people fighting? Why don't they just go get ice cream together?" It's something
Yeah.
like that that they just say very innocently, but you realize like, yeah, why can't that happen? And so there was some stuff going on at that point that they had caught. I want to say it was like on the school bus. They had like caught wind of
Some
something that was happening
conversation.
in the news, right? So either
Oh,
they
mhm.
overheard people talking or they overheard it on the radio or something along those lines. And at bedtime, one of them asked, and then the other one was kind of like, "Oh, yeah," and we sat and had this conversations, and they were just saying such beautiful things, and I was realizing that, like, my answering them, it was such a beautiful dance back and forth of trying to figure out these bigger things in the world, and that,
Mhm.
the way that we process things that when we're children can have such a depth of intellect to it
Yeah.
that it just I thought it was just an amazing experience, and so that was kind of what drew this poem was that I'd had one of those evenings where I just walked out of, bedtime like, wow, that made me think of things in a new way. So,
Yeah.
quietly at bedtime, alone, my children each often ask me questions. It is not to stall off bedtime, but because the questions come at night. We all know this well. In their dimly lit rooms, another day behind them, I think it is not just an answer they are looking for, but the sound of my voice owning the question, owning it beyond the place it has taken in their mind. In the glow of the nightlight, they search my eyes, reach for my hand, or press their bodies closer to mine, lying beside theirs to read before bed. In the dance of sleepy dialogue, our whispering voices try to make sense of what we don't know. For a moment, in the journey from innocence to growing up, with the backdrop of their babyhood stuffed animals mingling with their growing collection of big kid interests, there is our fascination with one another's thoughts on the question. Our answers are discovery and faith and the uncertainties of life, courage and hope. There are tears. There are hushed giggles, a hug, a finishing place for now. These questions teach me about my children and teach me about myself. I love you, I say, bless them, and give them a kiss on the forehead.
For me,
Yeah.
when I no, it gets me. When I read that, it makes me think about many things, but, um, being as a mother, being that container of being able to hold on to those heavy, not necessarily burdens, but those heavy, deep thoughts that a child can't fully comprehend,
Yeah.
and to be able to release that to their mother, to hold on to for them. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, that's beautiful.
You
Yeah.
is something that is, what parents do, and they hold space for their children and, kind of alleviate thoughts that are burdensome. And so for me, especially, Eva, my daughter is 12, and we are on the cusp of being a teenager and a teenager, and a lot of weird questions are coming up, and we're transitioning away from the childhood frame of mind and getting into a little bit more of a loss of innocence.
Yeah.
So it especially that one made me a little teary-eyed because it also makes me long for those moments again where the littles are still little.
Yeah. Well, and I
So
think too, like those bedtime questions still come. I mean, for me, I think that
mhm.
bedtime is like cherished. People will talk about like the dinner table, right? Which I think is an
Yeah,
important place for conversation. We try to have conversations there. But I think also bedtime, because I think of also as adults, we ourselves start to like
yeah.
your mind starts to wander at the end of the day. You start to think about different things because it's dark and you're tired and there's all those factors that come into play. And so I do think that part of it is like I love that you said container because I think it's
Mhm.
also like when they're asking the questions, part of it is the answer, but it's also like if I say it out loud and I hear you say it back and we talk about it, I'm not carrying this alone.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Which even extends beyond childhood, like, that's part of conversations like this too. You share something, you put it out there, and you let somebody connect with it, and then it's like,
Mhm.
I'm not alone in this, like, I have that
Mhm.
feeling, and I think that's why when they would ask me those questions, it would be very moving for me also because I would realize, like, you're not gonna walk up to your kids and be like, "Hey, can we talk about the really difficult thing that happened today right before bed?" But when your kids do ask it and you have that conversation, it's
Yep.
healing for you as well, right? Processing these things
Absolutely.
that we can't make sense of sometimes.
Absolutely. So I don't want to read any more of your poetry. We're going to keep talking about other things, but because I want people to buy your book and to really enjoy it and read it for themselves. So I'll have a link to Deb's book so you can find it. It's on Amazon. Um, so let me get back to asking you about your favorite poets
Yeah.
or songwriters.
Yeah. Excellent. So I actually do like William Shakespeare, although I know that there's not
Me
any
too.
guarantee that he wrote everything that he wrote. I know there's a lot of like, maybe it wasn't all him, but I like all of the stuff that's attributed to him. I think he does a lot of really interesting play with words.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating, right? Putting
Mhm.
things, personification, obviously, and stuff like that, but also just the twist of the phrase that makes it, you're like, wait a minute, what does that mean? What are you doing with that? So I think that he's definitely somebody that honestly, I think that everybody should read at least a couple of his things just to see the language.
Absolutely. For
Um,
sure.
I also like from a lyric perspective, gosh, there's a lot of different people. Let me finish poets first. So Emily Dickinson, I like. I mean,
Mhm.
Hope It's the Thing with Feathers has always been something that's kind of been in the back of my mind throughout my life. Robert Frost was one of my early
Oh,
favorites,
yeah.
and he actually was one of my when I was in elementary school. I had a teacher that had us read a couple Robert Frost poems. I think
Mhm.
he had to read some other poetry as well. But I read Robert Frost, and he's unlike Shakespeare, linguistically a little bit easier to understand from a like initial perspective, right? You can read through it, and he's a little bit easier to grasp. I
Bit
think
more
like at a young
simplified.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the language, right? And I mean, part of it has to do with it's not Old English, which is help,
Helps
but
a great deal. Yeah.
yeah, Old English, and Shakespeare was intentionally being ambiguous with some of his stuff so that you're like, "Wait, are
Mhm.
you being sarcastic?" So I found Robert Frost, particularly as an elementary student, like, "Oh, I get this. I understand this. This is pretty." And so I remember my parents, that was the first poetry book I ever got was this book of Robert Frost poetry when I was in,
Oh, wow.
gosh, probably 5th or 6th grade, and I still
Oh my
have it, the book.
gosh.
Yeah. So, yeah, I know I love my friends laugh at me. They're like, "There's no surprise." Like one of I got
It
for Easter
really
one year, I got like a dictionary in my Easter basket. They're like, "You were excited about that." I was like, "I still have it. I still have that dictionary." And then I got a big one for Christmas. So,
That's too funny.
definitely those poets. E. E. Cummings, I think is really neat.
Yeah.
Um, the, T.S.
E.E.
Eliot's oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say E.E. Cummings, as I already told you, my, well, briefly, my parents, when they met, my mom was still in college, and they courted each other by, just sharing different poetry that they enjoyed, and they loved E.E. Cummings. And so when I was growing up, we always had lots of poetry books in the house, and definitely E.E. Cummings. But again, like 12 years old, 13 years old, I'm reading these, and if you haven't seen E.E. Cummings, I mean, you have, Deb, but for anyone else listening, the way he structures the sentences, it's just like words kind of floating randomly on the page. And it was hard for me to comprehend. I still don't know that I fully grasp everything that he's talking about, but
Yeah.
anyway, he's great.
Well, and that's one of the things too when I was teaching students how to read poetry because I think there's some of the early poetry like you get in like elementary school like roses are red, violets are blue, like the phraseology ends at the end of the line. So
Yeah.
you in your mind think that's how I'm going to read all poetry and that's not how you read all poetry. You have to follow the cadence, the punctuation. E. E.
Hmm.
Cummings is a little trickier because he doesn't really give you there's not capital letters. There's like really no
No,
indication like whether
no.
you're coming or going, which is great for interpretation, but not great if you're like introducing to poetry and you're like, what? But I think like that was part of it was teaching kids how to read poetry because then they'd just be like, oh my gosh, no wonder I didn't understand this. Because they were like stopping at the end of the sentence and at the end of the line thinking that was the end stop to the phrase. And so it's not making
Right.
sense. So I think like getting comfortable with like reading the poetry, certainly Amanda Gorman, who I think has brought back, she was
Hmm.
the person that read at the inauguration. So
Yes,
she's brought poetry back. She brought poetry back to like the
absolutely.
forefront because in earlier times you'd sit around and you'd listen to poetry like we'd sit around and listen to music or watch a play.
Yes.
Then it kind of went out of vogue, but now it's like it's coming back a little bit and you'll notice like a lot of bookstores will do poetry readings and things like that.
Yeah.
So definitely those are some of my favorite poets. Lyricists and it's upset my husband would laugh at me right now that I can't think of the name of this person because I listen to him all the time and for whatever reason I can't think of the person's name right now, but Jack Johnson-esque type of
Sure.
musician. I'll have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
send you the name afterwards because I'm like, oh, why can't I think of this person's name? Noah Kahn, who is my daughter got me interested in.
Yeah.
Before he really became as big as he is now, like she had been one of the like found him on social media, I guess,
Yeah.
fairly early. And so she really and she had introduced me to some of his stuff, and I really liked the way that he plays with phrases and stuff. And again, because if you break it down and you take it outside of the music, so that you're not listening to the instrumentation, which is amazing in its own regard, and you just look at the lyrics, and it's funny how you can take sometimes what would be a very simple concept,
Mhm.
but make it into all of these complicated levels that feed off of each other. So I think that he does a really good job with that. And obviously Taylor Swift, whether you're a Taylor
Oh,
Swift
yeah,
fan or not, her songwriting ability and the people that she collaborates with is quite magnificent. I mean, they do a lot of things.
absolutely.
The phraseology, again, evoking emotions, making you could she could write a song about something you have no connection to on a personal level. You've
Yes.
never done anything similar, and yet you find yourself being like, "I get it," even though there's no way I can get it, but she's making me get it. So I think that that's absolutely brilliant. And I think a lot of right now the folk musicians which are coming back into style, like Noah Khan is like
Yes.
that folk
Yep.
a lot of that too. Like it's very anecdotal music. So you're hearing a story, the music is going on, there's the phrasing that's taking place, but there's also like you're listening to a story being told through the music. I think that that's really cool. Top House is one of the ones that I came across online
Mhm.
and I really enjoyed them.
I think,
Um,
Noah Cyrus, which is Miley's little
yeah.
sister, oh, she does, kind of more folk songs, and they're absolutely beautiful, just stunning, so
Yeah. Yeah, I think we sometimes people will say like, "Oh, well, it's the music that I'm listening to," but like it's the words that you end up, you repeat those words, those phrases,
I
they
think
catch
so.
on. Sometimes to the degree that you're like, "Why am I repeating this?" Like it'll be some silly comment, but like,
Right.
I think of Shut Up and Dance with Me, right? The song Shut Up and
Yeah,
Dance with Me. Like you
yeah,
didn't even need to like the song or know the song, but like when that song was on, everybody'd be like, "Shut up." So I think like
exactly.
certain things just and it's the cadence, it's the language. I like when words, like, almost don't rhyme, like, they just barely rhyme,
Yeah,
because I think it makes you pause for a moment because 'cause you're like, "Something just happened with that phrase, and I don't know what just happened," but it's because, like, your ear's like, "Oh, there's 2 ways I can pronounce those words, and this way makes them rhyme," and I just think that that's fun to kind of play around
it
with
is.
audibly.
One more thing before I let you go. If you hold up the book, share with us about the design of the book. There's 2 main components that I'm thinking of, but I'll let you go ahead.
All right. So thank you for asking about the cover.
Mhm.
And I'm going to talk more about this in the next book because there's a whole story behind it, but I will give you so this particular path is an actual path that exists at a campground nearby where we live that
Mhm.
I camped at as a kid and then I camped at with my kids. And what's really neat is I love that, like, you can't really see where you're going, right? Like
Yes.
it's just bright up there. And so there's a stream down here, and we camped there a lot. So again, like I camped there as a kid, I camped there then as an adult, and then I camped there with my own kids.
Mhm.
And one of the last times that we were camping there, my mom was going through cancer, and
Mm.
um, this particular path, she was standing somewhere up here in another picture that I had taken, and so
Yeah.
it's like you see this, and you see her standing up at the top of the light. So it's definitely it's got that association as well. But what's interesting is even prior to that, this particular, because it's actually a photograph, this particular
Yeah.
picture had always been one of my favorite pictures. And then I realized as I was looking back that I had another picture very similar with my mom standing at that. So that's just kind of like a little hidden thing. But
Yeah.
so I knew that I liked the picture, but when I put it on the cover as a photograph, I'm like, something didn't feel right. I think it's because like I don't this the same way as I like in poetry to be interpretive, I
Yeah.
wanted people to put their own story, their own path, because whatever choices you make, whether you go left or right, it's all one path. Your life from
Right.
start to finish is all one thing. So I really wanted to make it where you could kind of fill in some of the details. And so I kind of played around with the colors a little bit to make it more watercolor.
Yeah,
And then
it's
I
more
wanted
painterly.
Yeah, and then I wanted texture to it. I'm like, I need
Mhm.
there to be a texture. So that's where I put the canvas stuff behind it. So it was a process of kind of like taking it until and then when it hit, when I got it, the colors just right, the tone just right, and got the canvas stuff on the back of it, it was like I'm like, that is the book. Like that is the
Gorgeous.
cover of the book. So my daughter and my husband did weigh in as well. I did kind of want
Mhm.
and there was
Yeah.
instantaneously. And then the only other thing is I had kind of debated whether I wanted to put poems on it or just leave it. And I'm like, I really did because I wanted people to know that it was a poems book, but I wanted it to kind of be subtle behind it. But I just, yeah, like, that I knew that was going to be a piece to try to pick the cover. And
Mhm.
I knew I had also used, many years ago, I had started a blog on this path because the title of this book has been picked out for like over 10 years. Like I
Yeah, I
knew
was gonna
when I
say a
published
decade. Mhm.
it's going to be on this path. The poem on this path was written long after I had picked the title of this book. So like a lot of people are like, "Oh, is on this path the poem?" And that's why I'm like, it actually the poem came much after the fact. Um, but that's the story behind that is that was actually a path. I like that there's the roots there, right? Your
Yeah.
obstacles that you have to face and the shadows. And so it just fits so nicely with it. But I'm curious what was the part of it that kind of stuck out to you?
Well, I also love that you created intentional negative space. Like you have a lot of not blank pages, but like each poem is on its own page. There's room to annotate if you do that. My mom
Right.
raised me to never write in books, so I find this difficult. But some people are like really into that. But I'm gonna try with this one too and write down my thoughts. But I also love that you wanted this to be a soft cover book that's easily foldable
Yeah.
and bendable. You could put it in your bag, your back pocket, take it to
Right, right,
go, take it
right.
with
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging those things because there was a lot of thought into it, and I had, like as I had this collection of all these different poems and, like, how many
Mhm.
poems am I gonna put in it and how long, and, like, there was some doubt that happens when you're about to put stuff out there, and so I was like, "If I make it short, are people gonna be like, 'What, that's all this time in this short book?'" And I was like, it was really important to me, like
No.
you said, I wanted people to do that. I was also we didn't write in books when I was a kid, that was not a thing. I was in
Yeah.
college, and the professor was
Yeah.
like it was like a test or something, and he's like, "Whatever you have written in your book, you can use for this test." Is like and I was like, well, that's kinda interesting because it was a poetry book, actually. It was
Right.
American poetry anthology. And so
Yeah.
I started writing in it, and I realized, like, this is fun. It was like the poetry became more mine because even though somebody else had written it, when I
Mm.
circled it or underlined it and wrote my own note in it, now, like, the poem was partly mine, and that's
Yeah.
the experience that I wanted people to have, which was why I didn't include any of the anecdotal stuff in here. Enough in the preface that you, like, felt like, "Okay, I know Deb a little bit now, so now I'm
Yeah.
gonna walk this journey with Deb," but that you can kind of take and interpret a little bit of it and write your own stuff. And so I thought, I'm hoping there's even if people aren't a poetry person, there's at least one poem in there that are like, okay, I get that. And then we'll write their own stuff. And so that was why
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm gonna space them out one page. I'm gonna make it a soft cover. I'm gonna make it a certain length. So like I appreciate very much that being called out and acknowledged because there was thought into it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I do want people to feel that.
I love that. Well, all right, my friend. So I'm going to wrap up. This was
Okay.
amazing to have you with us and to be able to deep dive a little bit more into more of the background as to what inspired some of your poetry. I can't wait for, excuse me, I can't wait for the next book, as you said, because it's going to be a bit more anecdotal. The same poetry, new poetry, a mix of both, and anecdotes. Like, what were you envisioning there?
So it will have some new poems that I hadn't put
Okay,
in this book, but it will be reflections on on
cool.
these poems also. So it's gonna be like an essay and it'll be based on the poem. So like what was my take on it? What was going on? That will then segue into the next book, which will be fully autobiographical in nature, not from
Okay.
birth to death, but just gonna be more autobiographical
Yeah.
stuff. And then I have some short stories that
Oh, cool. Oh,
yeah, that I wrote a long time ago, and
okay.
then I've revisited multiple times, and they've never felt quite right, so but now they do, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Wow, how did I know that when I was writing this short story when I was, like, 21 years old,
Yeah.
that, like, it was gonna take till I was 48 to be like, that's the piece that I think it was I needed there's the one story specifically has to do with, somebody later in life, and I needed to be
Mm,
later in life to get, I think, the missing piece of the emotion. Something didn't feel right, and I'm like, I was missing the experience of what it would be like
yeah.
to be that person and be in that place. So that's exciting. Yeah.
I'm really excited about that. Okay, I can't wait for that. Deb, so I'm gonna link below where people can get a hold of you and reach out to you if they want to follow you, but also to find the book. Anything else that you wanted to share?
I think so, just as a general tip, whether you are an author or there's something else, motivating in your life, you asked the question about what made me make that decision, and there was
Yeah.
multiple facets, but there's a very specific reason that I noted you. I think it's important that we speak to people that we know will speak into our lives and help to do that. It's really hard to take the creative journey, the professional journey, all those different step out, whether you're an entrepreneur or a creative
Mhm.
process that you're going through. And to say to those people that will help you maneuver through that, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And to be, it's okay to look for reinforcement that's going to help you get it done and to live
100%.
it.
Yeah.
Because what I thought was going to be and what are, I mean, some of the comments that I've gotten from people already who've said to me that they've read a poem or read something in the preface that really moved them and initiated some change. And like, you just don't know what your one word can mean to somebody. So find a way that's going to help you to live your gift in a way that's going to help other people to live their gifts.
I love that. That's a perfect way to end. All right, Deb, thank you very, very much.
All right. Bye bye,
And
everybody.
bye. Take care.